The House Select Committee investigating the events of the January 6th attack on the Capitol delays their final hearing this week in what was supposed to be the punctuation of a series of bombshell hearings that has revealed startling details into what exactly happened before and during the deadly riots. So Hurricane Ian slamming into the Florida coast, forcing the House Select Committee to delay the final hearing of the January 6th attack. Joining me now from Washington is the House Chair of the Intel Committee and the January 6th Select Committee member, Congressman Adam Schiff. Welcome back to Sunday Morning Matters. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you.
You know, let's do some housekeeping real quick. When will we see that final hearing of the January 6th attack?
We are going to reschedule it either next week or the following week, so I would imagine within the next 2 weeks.
You know, and I'm wondering how much of a bombshell was it to the committee, maybe even yourself here, learning through a former congressman, Denver Riggleman, that there was some kind of communication between a person rioting at the Capitol and the White House. What do you say to that?
You know, it wasn't a surprise to us. We've been aware of this information for some time. And, you know, I think the problem with what Denver is saying publicly now is he only has information up to April when he left the committee. We've done a lot of investigative work since that time. So he's operating on incomplete information. And one of the things that has, I think, given the committee such credibility is we're very careful not to overstate matters or understate matters. So we haven't commented on evidence until we've had a full opportunity to see how significant it is. But I can tell you all of the information that he was working on, we've continued to work on and are pursuing in every way we can.
Do we know, or I should say, do you know the two people on either end of that phone line?
You know, I can't go into those specifics. We're not disclosing that at this time. And again, that'll be a committee decision when we make public what we know on that subject or others, which is why, you know, it is very unusual for a committee staff member to leave the committee. He was ostensibly going to help people in Ukraine, but instead apparently left to work on a book. And, you know, that was a profound departure, I think, from what we were expecting.
You know, before I move on to the situation in Armenia, I wanted to get your thoughts real quick. And I'm wondering, from what we are learning from the FBI raid of MarALago and the top secret documents that were seized, could it just be a mistake that while Trump and his team was moving out of the White House, those documents were boxed up by accident? Or do you think this was some kind of deliberate plot?
Well, it's very hard to understand how this could have been some kind of accident. You don't just box up a bunch of top secret documents. They're not things that are floating around the White House and intermix them with newspaper clips and whatnot and ship them off. What's more, when the archives went to them and said, hey, you've got a bunch of stuff that you shouldn't have, and when the FBI went to them and said, we believe that you have classified information, they were rebuffed time and time again. And that ultimately resulted in the FBI executing a search warrant and finding even more classified documents. So there were lots of opportunities for the former president and his staff to return these materials. And so it's hard to imagine how that could have been an accident.
Okay, I want to get to what's happening in Armenia. As you know, there's a lot of unrest, and we'll talk about some of the other unrest as well. But President Biden has not condemned the attack recently by the Azeri forces publicly. Does he need to?
I think that the administration needs to speak out very forcefully, unequivocally about the aggression by Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan has made war on Armenia and on the people of Artsakh. This is not tragically something new. They engaged in this unprovoked war 2 years ago, and we've seen a continuation of hostilities initiated by Azerbaijan. So I think everyone in the administration ought to condemn this. And more than that, we ought to cut off funding for Azerbaijan. I've introduced a bill to do that. I have had a chance to talk with the president about this issue and try to make the case why we shouldn't be giving any economic or military support to Azerbaijan.
And why that hasn't happened yet, I'm wondering, is the U.S. going to jump in? We know that Armenia relies on Russia so much. We know what's going on there in Ukraine. So Armenians left on an island, and I'm wondering if President Biden is set to offer any military aid to Armenia.
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I can say that Russia Armenia has been tragically, I think, very dependent on Russia militarily. They've been dependent on Russia economically. And I would love to see Armenia join the European Union, integrate its economy more with Europe than with this moribund Russian-dominated Eurasian Union. And I would certainly like to see them less dependent on Russia in any way. The Russian peacekeepers obviously have not been able to keep the peace. And I think that the inability of the international community to forcefully condemn Azerbaijan instead of engaging in this language of false equivalence, calling on both sides to refrain from violence when only one side is the aggressor, has really emboldened Aliyev, and it has to change.
So I just want to make sure I heard right. You would support Armenia join the EU?
I would absolutely support Armenia joining the EU, moving away from, economic dependence on Russia. Obviously, that's a decision for the EU. Armenia years ago had been moving in that direction and expressed interest in becoming a part of the EU. And at the time, the prime minister of Armenia was essentially summoned to Moscow, and from Moscow announced that no, they wouldn't join the European Union. They would join the Eurasian Union. And you can only imagine the amount of coercion that must have been brought on that former prime minister to do that.
I want to leave you with this, and you used to be on the Foreign Relations Committee, and there's a lot of unrest going on in this world right now. We know what's Russia, Ukraine, Armenia, Azerbaijan, what's happening in China, and their response to Taiwan. The president even saying there would be a physical response if China attacked Taiwan. And now we also have Iran, all the unrest there. Is this world headed to World War III?
Well, I certainly hope not, and we have to do everything we can to make sure that we don't. What Iran is doing right now, cracking down on protesters, peaceful protesters, protesting the fact that their morality police arrested a woman for not wearing an adequate headscarf and then beat her to the point where she died. We need to stand up and speak out on behalf of the right of Iranians to peacefully assemble and protest and support human rights in Iran. I've introduced the bill today to do exactly that. The two flashpoints, I think, though, that you mentioned, Taiwan and, of course, what's going on with Russia's unprovoked war in Ukraine, those are the most profound risks at this moment of dragging us into another war. And I think the Biden administration has done a really good job of providing Ukraine with as much support as possible, short of getting us into shooting war with Russia. And similarly, I think the Biden administration is doing its best to be supportive of the right of people in Taiwan to their democracy and their representative form of government. But also trying to deter China from any military adventurism that would get us embroiled in a conflict.
Congressman Schiff, you're always generous with your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.